The morning sun cast golden ripples across the surface of my pool as I floated on my back, eyes closed, letting the warm water cradle my tired bones. It was 7:30 a.m. on a Saturday, and this was my sanctuary, my reward for working 60-hour weeks as a marine biologist at the local aquarium. The chlorinated water wasn't quite the same as the ocean I spent my days studying, but it was mine, and it was peaceful. Or at least it had been peaceful until 3 months ago when Karen Whitmore moved in next door. I should have known trouble was brewing the day she introduced herself. She'd marched over to my fence line with a clipboard, an actual clipboard, and a smile so tight it looked like it might snap her face in half. "Hello there," she'd said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm Karen, your new neighbor. I just wanted to discuss some concerns about your property maintenance." That first conversation should have been a red flag the size of Texas. She'd complained about my grass being half an inch too long, my recycling bins being placed 2 feet to the left of where they should be, and most bizarrely, about the excessive splashing sounds coming from my pool during what she deemed inappropriate hours. What constitutes inappropriate hours for swimming in my own pool, I'd asked, genuinely curious about her logic. "Well, certainly not before 10 a.m. or after 6 p.m., she'd replied with the confidence of someone who'd never been told they were wrong about anything. "Some of us value peace and quiet." I'd laughed then, thinking she was joking. The laugh had been a mistake. Over the following weeks, Karen's complaints escalated with the determination of a woman who'd found her life's calling in making mine miserable. She filed noise complaints with the city about my disruptive swimming schedule. She called the homeowners association twice about my allegedly non-regulation pool fence height. She even had the audacity to suggest I install sound dampening barriers around my pool area, at my own expense, naturally. But it was the morning of May 15th that really set things in motion. I'd been dealing with a particularly stressful week at work. We'd lost 3 of our rescue sea turtles to a bacterial infection, and I'd spent countless hours trying to save them. Swimming was my therapy, my way of processing grief and frustration. So when my alarm went off at 6 a.m. that Saturday, I didn't hesitate to slip into my pool for an early morning swim. The water was perfect, cool enough to be refreshing, warm enough to be comfortable. I'd been swimming laps for maybe 20 minutes when I heard the familiar sound of Karen's sliding door opening with more force than necessary. I ignored it, focusing on my breathing, my stroke technique, the meditative rhythm of swimming. Then came the banging. Karen was literally banging a wooden spoon against a pot, standing at our shared fence line like some deranged rooster announcing an unwelcome dawn. "Excuse me?" she shrieked, her voice carrying across the water with the subtlety of a foghorn. "Excuse me!" I stopped mid-stroke and treaded water, wiping chlorine from my eyes. "Good morning, Karen. Is everything all right?" "All right? All right?" Her voice climbed an octave with each word. "It's 6:23 in the morning. Some of us are trying to sleep." I glanced at my waterproof watch. It was actually 6:47, but I didn't think correcting her would improve the situation. "I'm sorry if I woke you. I was trying to be quiet." "Quiet? You call this quiet?" She gestured wildly at my pool, as if I'd been operating heavy machinery instead of swimming gentle laps. "The splashing, the swimming sounds. It's completely unacceptable." I felt my patience, already worn thin by the week's events, beginning to fray. "Karen, I'm swimming in my own pool. I have every right to use my property. Not at the expense of your neighbor's peace and quiet, you don't." She was practically vibrating with indignation now. "I'm calling the police." And that's when something inside me snapped. Not in an angry way. I'm not the type to lose my temper and start shouting. But something cold and calculating clicked into place, the same methodical thinking I used when designing experiments at the lab. Karen wanted to escalate the situation? Fine. But she had no idea who she was dealing with. "You know what, Karen?" I said, my voice unnaturally calm as I floated in the center of my pool. "You should absolutely call the police. I think that's a fantastic idea." She blinked, clearly not expecting my agreement. Well, good. I will. Please do. And while you're at it, maybe mention to them that you've been harassing me for months about legally using my own property. I'm sure they'll find that very interesting. Her face flushed red, but she stormed back toward her house, muttering about entitled neighbors and property values. I watched her go, already formulating a plan. You see, Karen had made a crucial error in choosing me as her target. She'd assumed I was just another suburban homeowner who would buckle under pressure and conform to her arbitrary rules. What she didn't know was that I'd spent the last 8 years working with some of the most magnificent and intimidating creatures on Earth. I'd hand-fed great whites, performed surgery on injured bull sharks, and once spent 3 hours in the water with a pregnant tiger shark who'd gotten tangled in fishing nets. I'd learned to read the subtle signs of aggression, to understand predator behavior, and most importantly, to never show fear. Karen thought she was the apex predator in our little suburban ecosystem. She was about to learn otherwise. 20 minutes later, I heard the sirens. 2 police cruisers pulled up to my house, their red and blue lights painting my front yard in alternating colors. I dried off, threw on a t-shirt and shorts, and walked out to meet them with the kind of calm confidence that comes from knowing you're completely in the right. Officer Martinez, a stocky man with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who dealt with his share of neighborhood disputes, approached first. "Good morning, sir. We received a complaint about excessive noise and possible harassment." "Good morning, officer. I'm Dr. James Chen, and I assume you're here about my swimming." I gestured toward my pool. "I've been doing laps in my own pool, on my own property, and apparently that constitutes harassment, according to my neighbor." Officer Martinez's partner, a younger woman whose name tag read Officer Kim, glanced between my pool and Karen's house. "What time did you start swimming, Dr. Chen?" "Around 6:30. I work long hours during the week, so weekends are really my only time for exercise and stress relief." "And the complainant is claiming this constitutes a noise violation?" I nodded toward Karen's house, where I could see her peering through her blinds like a discount private investigator. "Mrs. Whitmore has been persistent in her complaints about my pool usage. This is probably the 5th or 6th time she's called various authorities about my swimming schedule." Officer Martinez made a note in his pad. "Is there a homeowners association involved?" "There is, and they've already told her multiple times that I'm not violating any regulations. My pool was inspected and approved when I bought the house 2 years ago." The officers exchanged a look that suggested they'd dealt with this type of situation before. Officer Kim stepped forward. "Dr. Chen, would you mind if we took a look at your pool area, just to document everything properly?" "Of course." As we walked toward my backyard, I continued. "I should mention that I'm a marine biologist at the Pacific Marine Research Institute. Swimming isn't just recreation for me. It's actually part of my professional conditioning. I work with large marine animals, and maintaining swimming stamina is essential for safety." "That's fascinating work," Officer Martinez said, and I could tell his interest was genuine. "What kind of marine animals?" "Primarily sharks and rays, though we have a full rehabilitation program for injured sea life. Actually, that's part of what makes this situation so ironic." We'd reached my pool, and both officers took a moment to look around. My backyard was well maintained, the pool was crystal clear, and everything was obviously in good order. There was no excessive noise, no disturbing elements, just a standard residential swimming pool. "How is it ironic?" Officer Kim asked. I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd felt all morning. "Well, I spend my days working with apex predators, creatures that have survived unchanged for millions of years because they're perfectly adapted to their environment. They're powerful, efficient, and they don't waste energy on unnecessary conflicts, but they also don't back down when something invades their territory." Officer Martinez chuckled. "I'm guessing you see some parallels to your current situation?" "You could say that." I looked toward Karen's house, where she was still watching from her window. "The thing about predators, officers, is that they're incredibly patient. They observe, they plan, and when they act, it's decisive and effective." "Dr. Chen," Officer Kim said carefully, "you're not planning anything aggressive toward your neighbor, are you?" I laughed. A real laugh this time. "Oh no, nothing like that. I'm a scientist, not a vigilante, but I do believe in natural consequences and educational experiences." The officers finished their inspection, took a few photos for their report, and prepared to leave. As they walked back toward their cars, Officer Martinez turned back to me. "Dr. Chen, for what it's worth, you seem like a reasonable guy dealing with an unreasonable situation. Just try to keep things civil, okay?" "Always, officer. I believe in taking the high road." As the police cars pulled, the beauty of working at a marine research institute is that you have access to resources most people can only dream of. 3 days after my conversation with the police officers, I found myself standing in our education department's storage facility staring at Bruce, our crown jewel of educational props. Bruce was a 16-foot-long, anatomically correct great white shark replica that had been crafted by Hollywood special effects artists for a documentary that never got made. When the production company went bankrupt, they donated Bruce to our institute, and he'd been the star of our educational programs ever since. He was so realistic that we'd had to put warning signs around him after several visitors fainted during their first encounter. "You want to borrow Bruce for a neighborhood education program?" Dr. Sarah Kim, our education director, raised an eyebrow as she looked at the requisition form I'd filled out. "That's unusual. We typically don't do residential presentations." "Well, this is a special case," I said, keeping my voice professionally neutral. "There's been some community interest in marine conservation, and I thought a dramatic visual aid might help drive the message home." Sarah had known me for 5 years, and I could see her trying to read between the lines. "James, this wouldn't have anything to do with your neighbor situation, would it? The one you mentioned at the staff meeting last week?" "I prefer to think of it as applied behavioral psychology," I replied with a straight face, "with a focus on predator-prey dynamics in suburban environments." She laughed despite herself. "You know what? I don't want to know the details, just promise me you won't end up on the evening news?" "I promise the Marine Institute will only receive positive publicity from this educational initiative." 24. Hours later, I was backing my pickup truck into my driveway with Bruce carefully secured in the bed, covered by a tarp. It was a Tuesday evening, and Karen's routine was as predictable as clockwork. She'd be home from her errands, which seemed to consist mainly of complaining to various municipal offices about neighborhood infractions, by 6 p.m., and she'd spend the next hour doing her property inspection, walking around her yard looking for things to be upset about. I'd timed this perfectly. The first phase of my plan was simple: install Bruce in my pool under cover of darkness, then wait for Karen's inevitable morning confrontation. But as I began uncovering the shark, I realized I had an opportunity to make this even more educational. You see, Bruce wasn't just a static prop. He was designed for interactive educational experiences. He had internal air chambers that could be inflated to make him float at different depths, articulated fins that moved with water current, and most impressively, a remote-controlled dorsal fin that could extend above the water surface and move in realistic swimming patterns. This was going to be even better than I'd originally planned. Working by the light of my phone's flashlight, I carefully lowered Bruce into my pool. The shark was designed to be neutrally buoyant, so he floated just below the surface like a sleeping predator. I tested the remote control for the dorsal fin. It worked perfectly, cutting through the water with menacing efficiency. But the real masterstroke came when I remembered the underwater lighting system I'd installed in my pool the previous summer. Bruce's dark silhouette against the illuminated water created an absolutely terrifying shadow, especially when viewed from Karen's second-story bedroom window, which overlooked my backyard. I set my alarm for 5:30 a.m. and went to bed with the satisfied feeling of a scientist who'd designed the perfect experiment. The next morning, I slipped into my pool at exactly 6 a.m., just as I had every morning for the past month. Karen's complaints about my swimming schedule had become so predictable that I could set my watch by them. Sure enough, at 6:15, I heard her sliding door open. "Oh my God!" Karen's shriek was so loud it probably woke half the neighborhood. I looked up from my leisurely backstroke to see her standing at our shared fence, pointing at my pool with a trembling finger. "What's wrong, Karen?" I asked innocently, treading water about 6 feet away from Bruce's motionless form. "There's a shark in your pool!" she screamed, her voice climbing to frequencies that probably bothered only dogs and marine mammals. "There's a giant shark in your pool, and you're swimming with it!" I glanced around the pool as if noticing Bruce for the first time. "Oh, that's just Bruce. He's perfectly harmless." "Harmless. Harmless." Karen was now gripping the fence so tightly her knuckles were white. "It's a great white shark in a residential swimming pool. This is insane." "Actually," I said, beginning to swim a slow circle around Bruce, "great whites are really quite misunderstood creatures. They're apex predators, yes, but they're also incredibly intelligent and generally avoid human contact unless they feel threatened or invaded." I could see Karen's face cycling through about 15 different expressions as she processed what she was seeing. Fear, confusion, outrage, and what I was pretty sure was the beginning of a panic attack. "This is illegal," she finally managed to gasp. "You can't keep a shark as a pet. I'm calling animal control. I'm calling the police. I'm calling the news." "You should definitely call someone," I agreed pleasantly, then activated Bruce's dorsal fin with the remote control I'd hidden behind my back. The fin broke the surface of the water and began moving in slow, predatory circles around the pool. Karen's eyes widened to the size of dinner plates. "It's moving!" she shrieked. "The shark is moving!" "Of course he's moving," I said, now swimming, alongside the mechanical fin. "He's a living creature, Karen. Though I have to say, he's usually much more active than this. He must be in a good mood today." That's when Karen fainted. She went down like a sack of potatoes, right there on her own patio. For a moment, I was genuinely concerned. This had been meant as a harmless prank, not a medical emergency. I quickly swam to the edge of the pool and vaulted out, grabbing a towel as I rushed to the fence. "Karen? Karen, are you okay?" She was breathing, just unconscious. I was about to hop the fence to check on her when I heard sirens approaching. Apparently, she'd managed to call 911 before the full shock of seeing Bruce had hit her. This time, it wasn't just 2 patrol cars. This was a full emergency response. Police, paramedics, and what appeared to be an animal control truck with some very confused-looking officers. The paramedics attended to Karen, who was coming around, and immediately began pointing at my pool while speaking in rapid, incoherent sentences about monster sharks and neighborhood safety. Meanwhile, the police, officers and animal control approached my fence with the kind of cautious demeanor usually reserved for armed standoffs. "Dr. Chen?" Officer Martinez had returned, and I could see him trying to process the scene. "We received reports of a dangerous animal situation?" "Well," I said, wrapping my towel around my shoulders, "that depends on how you define dangerous." The animal control officer, a weathered woman named Janet who looked like she'd seen everything, peered into my pool. "Is that a great white shark?" "That's Bruce," I replied. "He's 16 feet long, weighs about 400 pounds, and he's absolutely fascinated by human behavior patterns." Janet stared at me for a long moment. "Dr. Chen, I'm going to need you to explain this situation very carefully, because what I'm seeing doesn't make sense." "Of course. Bruce is an educational prop from the Pacific Marine Research Institute. He's a completely artificial replica designed for educational presentations. I borrowed him for a neighborhood awareness program about marine conservation." I could see the moment when understanding dawned on Janet's face. She walked closer to the pool, studying Bruce's motionless form, then began to laugh. "This is a fake shark," she announced to the assembled emergency responders. "It's a very realistic fake shark, but it's definitely not alive." Officer Martinez looked from the pool to Karen, who was now sitting up and insisting to the paramedics that she'd seen the shark move, then back to me. "Dr. Chen, did you tell Mrs. Whitmore that this was a real shark?" "I never said Bruce was real," I replied truthfully. "I said he was harmless, and that he was usually more active. Both of those statements are completely accurate." The paramedic attending to Karen looked up. She's physically fine, just had a panic attack, but she's insisting that the shark was moving around the pool. I pulled out the remote control and activated Bruce's dorsal fin. The mechanical fin broke the surface and began its programmed swimming. Pattern, drawing gasps from several of the responders. It's radio-controlled, I explained. Bruce is designed for interactive educational experiences. The fin movement helps demonstrate natural shark behavior patterns. Officer Martinez was now openly grinning. So let me get this straight. Your neighbor has been calling in complaints about your swimming schedule, so you borrowed a giant fake shark to... what exactly? To provide an educational experience about predator behavior and territorial dynamics, I said with complete sincerity. I thought it might help Mrs. Whitmore understand that there are much bigger fish in the sea than neighborhood pool disputes. Janet from Animal Control was now examining Bruce more closely. This is actually incredible craftsmanship. The anatomical details are perfect. We could use something like this for our educational programs. I'd be happy to arrange a demonstration, I offered. The Marine Institute is always looking for